The Fourth Way by P.D. Ouspensky. Chapter 3. And in our last reading of this chapter, Ouspensky was talking about the expression, he forgot himself. And he was saying that in actual fact, we always forget ourselves. And with the exception of very rare moments, we never remember ourselves in time. And then we go into a Q&A. Now let me remind you that Ouspensky was a student of Gurdjieff, so the questions are always posed by Ouspensky and the answers are always given by Gurdjieff. Question: is self-remembering the initial process of the system? Answer: it is the center of the initial process, and it has to go on. It must enter into everything. At first, this sounds improbable, because you may try to remember yourself, and then you find that for long periods of time, it does not come to your mind. And then again, you begin to remember about it. But efforts of this kind are never lost. Something accumulates, and at a certain moment, when in the ordinary state you would have completely identified and submerged in things, you find that you can stand aside and control yourself. You never know when it will be or how it comes. You must only do what you can. Observe yourself, study, and chiefly try to remember yourself. Then, at a certain moment, you will see results. Question: how does one begin to use memory in the sense of self-remembering? Answer: self-remembering is not really connected with memory. It's simply an expression. It means self-awareness or self-consciousness. One must be conscious of oneself. It begins with the mental process of trying to remember oneself. This capacity to remember oneself must be developed because in self-observation, we must try to study our functions separately from one another. Intellectual functions separately from the emotional, instinctive separately from moving. This is very important, but not easy. Question: do you mean that we should practice observing these different functions? Answer: yes. At certain moments of the day, we must try to see in ourselves what we think, how we feel, how we move, and so on. At one time, you can concentrate on the intellectual function. At another time, on the emotional, and then on the instinctive or the moving. For instance, try to find out what you're thinking about, why you think, and how you think about it. Try to observe physical sensations such as warmth, cold, what you see, what you hear. Then, every time you make a movement, you can see how you move, how you sit, how you stand, how you walk, and so on. It's not easy to separate instinctive functions because in ordinary psychology, they are mixed with the emotional. It takes some time to put them in their right place. Question: would there be any sense in breaking down certain habitual actions, such as going to bed at a certain time at night? Answer: mechanical changes of that kind may be useful in the beginning of self-study, but they cannot produce any lasting effect. They may help you to see something that you would not have seen otherwise, but by themselves they cannot produce any change. Change must begin from inside, from change of consciousness, from the moment when you begin to remember yourself, or even earlier when you begin to realize the possibility of self-remembering, and that it is really important. Only unfortunately it often happens that people start well and then lose the line of efforts. Question: does observing mechanicalness impair mechanicalness? I was thinking of physical work. Answer: without work on consciousness, all the sides of us that can be conscious will become more and more mechanical. Only very uniform work without any variations is totally mechanical. If work is a little more complicated, then the more mechanical it is, the worse it is. In no work is mechanicalness useful. One has to adapt, to change methods, in order to produce good work, and for that one has to be aware of what one is doing. Being efficient in physical work does not mean mechanicalness. Training does not make us more mechanical. Being an expert means being intelligent about one's work. Question. The moving and instinctive centers seem to work more evenly and normally than the intellectual and emotional. Why is this so? Answer. Because otherwise people would go to the left instead of going to the right and never get where they want to go. If the instinctive center were more like the intellectual and the emotional centers are now, a man would soon poison himself. A certain degree of normality is obligatory for the instinctive and moving centers. Other centers can go mad without immediate harm. In order to understand man's mechanicalness, it's very useful to learn to think about him as a machine, to study the functions of this machine, and to understand the chief divisions of function, not only in general, not merely in theory, but to study them in their activity, to learn how they work. This division into 4 functions is only a preliminary division because each of them is again subdivided. All this has to be studied and understood by observation. Because the theoretical study does not give the same result, it does not lead to the same conclusions, does not show the same truth. For instance, very few systems recognize the existence of the instinctive center or instinctive mind, and no system I have heard of recognizes the existence of an independent moving mind. Yet, moving mind plays a very important part in our life. So the absence of this division spoils to a great extent the results of ordinary observation of man, particularly in modern psychology. For since this fact is not recognized, many things are ascribed to a wrong origin. Moving center is very important to study and observe because it has other functions besides movement in space, such as, for instance, as imitation, which is a very important function in man number 1. Besides, moving center also controls dreams, and not only dreams at night, but dreams in waking state, daydreams. And since most of our life passes either in real dreams or in daydreams, study of the moving function is most important. We think that the intellectual and emotional side is more important, but actually most of our life is controlled by instinctive and moving minds. So moving center has many useful and many useless functions. Question. Is there a connection between behaving mechanically and moving center? Answer. No, moving center only means the mind whose legitimate function is to control movements. So, moving and mechanical are not the same. Every center may be mechanical. Every function can be more mechanical or less mechanical, more conscious or less conscious. Certainly, there are some mechanical processes in us for which there is no need to become conscious, such as the physiological processes, which are arranged and controlled by their own mind. But it is our actions as a whole, both in relation to ourselves and to other people, that can become harmful if they're left to themselves. Question. Is talking always mechanical? I often talk before I have time to stop it. Answer. In most cases, this is one of the first things one has to observe and struggle with. It is very difficult to observe and difficult to struggle with, but it must be done. Question. I used to think that by talking about my observations, I was formulating them, but now I feel there is a danger of observation evaporating in talking? Answer. They may be a very different talking. You can talk for the sake of talking, or you can make yourself talk with effort. Talking can be awakening, and it can be sleep. Question. Could we be told of some way of making more efforts to observe? Answer. If you put yourself in a more difficult position, for instance, if you assume an unaccustomed posture, you won't be able to stop observing. We do not observe ourselves because life is too easy. If you are hungry, cold, tired, you will observe yourself. But with civilization, there are no strong physical sensations. We smooth out all things before they reach a degree that will make us observe. Question. Is this the kind of observation you want us to practice? I thought it was more of an observation of our inner states. Answer. Everything is useful. The study of the machine is also necessary, as well as the psychological side. You cannot study one side without the other. You must know how the machine works. Question. How do you know how many centers there are? Answer. By observation. In the ordinary way, you can control 4 different functions, which obviously come from different sources, controlled by different principles. Self-observation shows this quite clearly, and after some time you cannot mix them. Question. Why haven't modern psychologists come to that conclusion? Answer. Because they do not know about it. The division of centers looks very simple, yet the fact that it is not known shows that the ordinary mind cannot discover it. Ordinary mind, if you take existing psychology, just feels something different, but cannot definitely say that this is one thing and that is another thing. The idea comes from schools, just as does the complete idea of the division of the 4 states of consciousness. You can find this last idea in literature, but the description is quite different, so again it comes from schools and must be explained orally. There are things which can be described in books, and there are other things which can never be rightly described. Question. So the idea of centers is an old idea? Answer. It is very old, but we cannot discover it until we are told about it. If we are told, we can observe ourselves and find that it is true. But by ourselves we cannot discover it. Facts prove this, for it has not yet been discovered.